The first thing you notice at a funeral isn't the grief, it's the sound. The wet, sucking sound of a shovel hitting damp earth. The quiet, rhythmic squeak of the winch as it lowers 1,000 pounds of polished cherry wood and broken promises into the ground. I stood there, my back ramrod straight, not a tear in my eye. My son David stood beside me, his body shaking with sobs that seemed to pull him down, as if he wanted to follow his father into that 6-foot hole. He gripped my arm, but it wasn't for my comfort. It was for his. He needed an anchor, and for 45 years, that had been my job. Anchor, ghost, wife. In that order. I wasn't grieving Frank. How can you grieve a man who died 20 years before his heart stopped beating? No, I was grieving me. I was grieving the detective I had been, the woman who could read a killer's soul in a twitch of his eye, who had traded interrogation rooms for a silent, pristine kitchen in Willow Creek, New Jersey. I was grieving the 45 years I'd spent swallowing my words, shrinking my presence, making myself small enough to fit into the box Frank had built for me. And now, he was getting his own box. It felt less like a tragedy and more like a long overdue trade. My eyes scanned the crowd, the usual faces, neighbors with their casseroles and their pity, old business partners of Frank's, looking uncomfortable in their expensive suits, checking their watches when they thought no one could see. And then I saw her, my daughter-in-law, Chloe. She stood next to David, a mask of perfect sorrow etched onto her face. She dabbed a silk handkerchief at her dry eyes, but the mask slipped. For just a second, a flicker, as the first shovelful of dirt hit the casket with a dull, final thud. It wasn't a smile, not a full one. It was something sharper. It was the corner of her mouth, twitching upwards. It was the light in her eyes, a flash of pure, unadulterated victory. The look of a predator that has just watched its rival finally, definitively, fall. In that moment, I knew as surely as I knew my own name, that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Later, back at the house, the air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and the low murmur of forced sympathy. People I hadn't seen in a decade patted my shoulder and told me Frank was in a better place. I wanted to tell them Frank's better place was the 18th hole at the country club, but I just nodded. I was playing the part. The grieving widow. It was the last role I would ever play for them. Chloe drifted through the rooms like a shark, her smile now perfectly calibrated for the occasion. Warm, sad, supportive. She refilled glasses, offered condolences to people she'd never met, acting every bit the lady of the manor she so desperately wanted to be, my manor. She finally cornered me by the large bay window in the living room, the one that overlooked the garden Frank had always promised to tend, but never did. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice a low, syrupy whisper. She placed a cool hand on my arm. "You're being so strong. I don't know how you do it." I didn't answer. I just watched her. I had interrogated dozens of suspects who used that same tone. The false intimacy, the attempt to create an alliance where none existed. "I know this is a terrible time," she continued, her thumb stroking my arm in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt like she was testing the quality of the fabric. "But David and I have been talking. We're worried about you." "Worried," I repeated. My voice was flat, a tool I hadn't used in years, the voice that gave nothing away. "All alone in this big house," she said, her eyes sweeping across the high ceilings, the grand staircase. She wasn't seeing a home. She was seeing square footage. She was seeing dollar signs, the upkeep, the stairs. It's just too much for one person. We need to start thinking about downsizing. For your own good." There it was, not a suggestion, not a question. It was a verdict. She had seen the flicker of victory at the cemetery, and now she was pressing her advantage, moving her pieces across the board while the king was still warm in his grave. She thought I was a pawn, a frail old woman to be managed, moved, and eventually removed. I pulled my arm away from her grasp. I looked from her perfectly manicured hand to her perfectly painted face. The war wasn't coming. The first shot had just been fired, and it had been aimed directly at me. My retirement, I realized with a sudden, cold clarity, was officially over. That was a year ago. A year of quiet skirmishes, of veiled threats, and feigned concern. I expected her to come at me with lawyers, with real estate agents from Sotheby's, with documents printed on thick, intimidating paper. I was a detective. I was trained to look for the obvious weapons, the gun, the knife, the legal contract. I was a fool. Chloe was a creature of a new era. Her weapons were quieter, more insidious. She didn't want to just take my house. She wanted to take my mind. My home is no longer a sanctuary. It's a cage. A smart cage, she calls it. After a staged fall down 2 steps, a fall I suspect was facilitated by a conveniently placed throw rug, Chloe and David insisted on upgrading the house. For my safety, of course. Now, my life is a 24/7 live stream, curated by Chloe. There are cameras, small black domes, nestled in the corners of every room. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Even one pointed at the top of the stairs. Motion sensors trigger lights, making the house feel like it's breathing around me, anticipating my every move. And the thermostat is controlled by an app on Chloe's phone. The locks on the doors can be engaged or disengaged from her iPad in the next town over. She calls it a smart home. I call it a prison. She's the warden, and my son David is her most loyal guard. He doesn't see the bars. He sees her love, her concern. Chloe sends him a constant stream of proof. Carefully edited clips, stripped of all context, that paint a portrait of a woman unraveling. Last Tuesday, I was trying to open a new jar of olives. The lid was sealed tight. I struggled with it for a minute, my arthritis flaring in my knuckles, before setting it down on the counter to get a better grip. An hour later, David called. "Mom, are you okay?" Chloe sent me a video. His voice was tight with that strained patience he'd developed over the past year. "You were having trouble with a jar. You look so frail." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that his father, the great Frank Miller, couldn't open a jar of pickles to save his life. That strength has nothing to do with grip. But I just said, "I'm fine, David. It was a new jar." "Okay, Mom. Okay. Just be careful." Then there was the stove incident. I had made myself a cup of tea. I turned the gas burner off. I know I did. I have a routine, a mental checklist I've run through my entire life. Keys, wallet, stove off. It's ingrained. An hour later, my phone buzzed with an alert from the smart smoke detector. Chloe was calling a second after. "Elizabeth! Oh my God! Are you okay? The stove! You left the burner on again!" She was in the house in 10 minutes, her face a mask of frantic worry. David was on FaceTime on her phone. "See, David," she said, turning her phone to the stove, where a low blue flame was indeed licking the air. "I told you." She forgot again. "This is getting dangerous." I stared at the flame. It was impossible. Unless someone could turn it on remotely. Unless the smart stove she'd insisted on installing wasn't just smart, it was complicit. But I'm a detective. I was a detective long before Alexa was a household spy. You can't build a cage around a mind like mine, not one made of silicon and Wi-Fi. Chloe controlled the network in my house, but she didn't control the world. Every Wednesday, I told her I was going to my book club. There is no book club. There is, however, a public library with free anonymous Wi-Fi and computers that don't answer to Chloe. I became a ghost of a different kind. I'd sit in a hard plastic chair, the air smelling of old paper and disinfectant, and I would dig. I started with Frank. I still had the passwords to his cloud accounts, his email. He was a man of meticulous, predictable habits. He backed everything up. I scrolled through years of digital dust, bank statements, emails to his golf buddies, photos from cruises, and then I found it. In his search history, from the last week of his life, the screen glowed in the dim light of the library. My blood went cold. Painless ways to end suffering. Digitalis toxicity symptoms and heart failure. Undetectable heart attack agents. Can a smartwatch ECG be fooled? I leaned back in the creaking chair, the breath knocked out of me. This wasn't Frank. This was an absolute, categorical impossibility. Frank was a fighter. Frank argued with a parking meter for 20 minutes. Frank once spent 6 months in a legal battle over a $50 fine from the Homeowners Association. He was a man who believed the world owed him, a man who would never, ever willingly check out and let the world win. He wouldn't search for ways to end his life. But someone else would. Someone who had access to his phone, his laptop. Someone who stood to gain from his permanent absence. Someone with a flicker of victory in her eyes at a graveside. My investigation had its first real piece of evidence, and its first prime suspect. The psychological warfare began in earnest. It was a ballet of gaslighting, and I was its unwilling prima ballerina. Chloe's tactics were insidious, designed to chip away at my sanity piece by piece, while her cameras recorded the demolition. She was building a case against my mind, and I was her star witness. It started with small things. My car keys, which for 45 years have lived on a brass hook by the door, vanished. I spent 20 minutes searching, my frustration mounting with every empty drawer and cleared countertop. I felt that familiar hot spike of anger. I knew I had put them there. I knew it. Chloe arrived, ostensibly to drop off some organic groceries I hadn't asked for. "What's wrong, Elizabeth?" she asked, her brow furrowed with that practiced concern. "I can't find my keys," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. She tutted softly. "Oh, you and your memory. Let me help you look." She walked directly to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and pulled them out from behind a carton of milk. "Silly goose," she chirped, dangling them in front of me. "Here they are. You must have put them in here when you got the milk out this morning." I stared at the keys, condensation dripping from the metal. I had not put my keys in the refrigerator. But the camera in the kitchen would have recorded me searching frantically, growing more agitated, and it would have recorded Chloe, calm and helpful, finding them in a forgetful place. Another clip for David, another brick in the wall she was building around me. Then came the cold. It was the middle of a sweltering July, the kind of humid New Jersey summer that makes you feel like you're breathing water. Yet the house was freezing, an unnatural bone-deep chill that had me pulling on thick sweaters and wool socks. I'd check the thermostat, the one I was still allowed to touch, and it would read 72 degrees. But the air blasting from the vents felt like it was coming straight from a meat locker. "David, the air conditioning is broken," I told him over the phone. "It's like an icebox in here." An hour later, he was at the door, with Chloe right behind him. "Mom, what's this about the AC?" "It's freezing," I insisted. "Feel it." Chloe pulled out her phone, her face a picture of gentle patience. "Honey, look," she said to David, showing him the screen. It was her smart home app. "The thermostat is set to 72, just like she likes. All the sensors are reading 72.5 degrees. There's nothing wrong with the system." David walked over to a vent and held his hand over it. "It feels fine to me, Mom." He looked at me, and that's when I saw it. The look that broke a piece of my heart. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disbelief. It was pity. The deep, weary pity of a son who was convinced his mother was losing her grip on reality. He saw a fragile old woman, shivering from imaginary drafts. He no longer saw the woman who once stared down a serial killer in a windowless room and saw the lie in his eyes before he even spoke. Chloe recorded it all. My frustration about the keys, my confusion about the temperature, my arguments that things were not as they seemed. She would edit the clips together into a montage of instability, a highlight reel of my supposed decline. One evening, David came over alone. That was rare. Chloe usually accompanied him, her presence a constant suffocating buffer between us. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, where I'd bandaged his scraped knees. He looked older, tired. He slid his phone across the table. "Mom, I want you to watch this." He pressed play. It was me. A clip from the day before, after Chloe had found my reading glasses in the pantry. The video showed me pacing in the living room, alone, muttering to myself. "I'm not crazy," my voice on the recording said, tight with a desperate rage. "She's doing this. She's moving things. I know she is." My face was twisted in a mask of helpless fury. It was a picture of paranoia. David looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Mom, Chloe is just trying to help. We're all worried. She found someone, a doctor, a specialist. He's a friend of her family's, very well respected. Dr. Marcus Thorne. We think you should talk to him. Before you hurt yourself. Dr. Marcus Thorne. The name hung in the air between us. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the next step in their plan. First, they built the prison. Then, they documented the prisoner's insanity. Now they were bringing in the executioner. They weren't just building a case against my sanity. They were preparing to have me declared incompetent, to take control, to win the war. And my own son, my flesh and blood, was handing them the weapon. He looked at me with love, yes, but it was the love one has for a thing that is broken. He saw a patient. He didn't see the detective, but the detective saw everything. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than any phantom draft, that she was no longer just investigating a suspicious death. She was fighting for her life. The war wasn't going to be fought in the open. It couldn't be. In my own home, I was a prisoner of a digital panopticon, every sigh recorded, every frustration cataloged as evidence of my decline. Chloe wanted a frail, confused old woman. She would get one. But in the shadows, the detective I used to be was waking up, stretching muscles that had atrophied over years of quiet domesticity. The first step was to break my digital chains. I used the weekly grocery delivery as my cover. While the young man from the store was unloading bags in the kitchen, under Chloe's watchful eye through the living room camera, I made my move. I told him I'd forgotten to add cat food to the order for my neighbor's pet and asked if he could possibly pick some up. I pressed a $50 bill into his hand, far more than it would cost. "And with the change," I said, my voice deliberately a little shaky, "could you be a dear and also get me one of those simple prepaid phones from the electronics aisle? The cheapest one. My landline has been acting up." He looked at me with the kind of pity I was learning to weaponize. He saw a lonely old woman, desperate for a small kindness. He didn't see the glint in my eye. He just nodded, smiled, and promised he'd be right back. An hour later, I had it. A cheap, plastic burner phone, the kind you see in movies, a tool for the clandestine. It felt both foreign and familiar in my palm, my escape route. The next challenge was activating it and using it without being traced. The smart house tracked every device that connected to its network. Connecting the burner here would be like sending up a flare. I needed to get out. My chance came 2 days later, during my supervised walk. Chloe had insisted David drive me to Willow Creek Park. "Some fresh air will do you good, Mom," he'd said, his voice laced with that infuriating, gentle condescension. He sat on a bench, scrolling through his phone, while I was instructed to walk the paved loop around the duck pond. To him, I was a toddler let loose in a padded room. He wasn't watching my hands. He was just making sure I didn't wander off. As I rounded a bend, out of his direct line of sight for a few precious minutes, I sat on a memorial bench dedicated to a fallen veteran. I pulled the burner phone and the small SIM card from my coat pocket. My fingers, stiff with age, fumbled with the tiny plastic tray. For a moment, a wave of frustration hit me. 40 years ago, I could field strip a service weapon in the dark. Now I was struggling with a piece of technology designed for a teenager. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and slid the SIM card home. The phone buzzed to life. I didn't turn on the data yet. I walked the rest of the loop, performing the part of a docile mother for my son. When we got home, I hid the phone inside a hollowed-out copy of War and Peace on my bookshelf, a place no one in this house would ever look. My real work began in stolen moments, in the dead of night. I'd claim I couldn't sleep and go downstairs to make tea. The kitchen camera was positioned to see the stove and the sink, but it didn't have a clear view of the small breakfast nook. I'd sit there, in the dark, the phone's screen shielded by my body, and I'd connect to a neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi network, a signal so weak it was barely a whisper. It was all I needed. I needed a ghost. A new identity. I couldn't be Elizabeth, the retired detective. I had to be someone else, someone invisible, someone who belonged in the digital spaces I needed to explore. I created Brenda Peterson. Brenda was 74, a widow from Dayton, Ohio. Her husband, a sweet man named Stan, had died of a heart attack 2 years prior. Her children were grown and lived far away. She was lonely. Her only companion was a ginger cat named Marmalade. I found a stock photo of a vaguely pleasant-looking woman who could pass for me in a blurry profile picture. I wrote a short, sad bio filled with cliches about finding silver linings and cherishing memories. Brenda was born from a cocktail of grief, loneliness, and kilobytes. My first stop was Facebook. I searched for groups. Widows over 60 support circle. Seniors navigating the golden years. Grief and loss for the newly alone. I joined a dozen of them. As Brenda, I didn't post much at first. I just listened. I learned the language. The shared platitudes, the prayer hand emojis, the passive-aggressive complaints about neglectful children, veiled in saccharine posts about family. It was a sea of genuine pain, but circling that pain, like sharks, were the predators. The financial advisors offering free consultations. The self-proclaimed gurus selling courses on finding happiness after loss. The men who sent private messages that started with sympathy and quickly veered into requests for money. I saw the ecosystem of exploitation laid bare, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that Dr. Marcus Thorne was one of these apex predators. He was just more sophisticated. Chloe had been pushing him on me for weeks. He specializes in geriatric cognitive health, Elizabeth. He's the best, she'd said, sliding a glossy brochure across my kitchen table. Dr. Thorne's face smiled up at me from the page. He had kind eyes, silver hair, and a reassuringly expensive-looking suit. His bio was a masterpiece of curated empathy, Harvard Medical School, published author, a passion for helping seniors navigate the complex emotional landscape of their twilight years. It was all too perfect. His digital footprint was immaculate. He had a professional website with glowing testimonials, a LinkedIn profile that was a monument to achievement, and a series of YouTube interviews where he spoke in calm, measured tones about the dignity of aging. Criminals, in my experience, fell into two categories, the sloppy and the meticulous. The meticulous were always the most dangerous. The cleaner the record, the dirtier the hands. Thorne's record wasn't just clean, it was sterile. He was my target. My investigation into Thorne had to be methodical, a patient chipping away at a flawless facade. I started with his practice. Thorne Geriatric Psychiatry, a prestigious address on the Upper East Side. I couldn't just walk in. I couldn't make an appointment. That would put me directly in his and Chloe's hands. I needed a way in from the side. I needed his patient list. The plan formed in my mind during another sleepless night, the blue light of the burner phone illuminating my face in the dark of the breakfast nook. It was a classic, old-school social engineering gambit. It was risky. If I failed, it could alert him. But I had no other choice. I waited until 4:55 p.m. on a Friday, the perfect time to call any office. Staff are tired, their minds are on the weekend, and procedures get sloppy. I used a voice-altering app on the burner phone, pitching my voice slightly higher, adding a frantic, stressed edge to it. I dialed the number for Thorne's office. Doctor, Thorne's office. This is Sandra speaking. Her voice was weary. Sandra, thank God, I began, my voice a torrent of controlled panic. This is Maria, from Citywell Pharmacy on Lexington. We have a huge problem. Our system just crashed during a data migration, and we've lost our entire active prescription file for the last 48 hours. It's a nightmare. The IT guys say it could be days before it's restored. Oh my God, Sandra said, her sympathy immediate. That's terrible. Tell me about it, I said, injecting a sob. The real issue is, we have a Dr. Thorne patient, a Mr. Alistair Finch, here for a refill on his cardiac medication, and I have nothing in the system. I can't dispense it without verification. It's a huge liability, but he's very distressed. I was hoping, I know this is a massive ask, but could you possibly just quickly email or fax me a list of Dr. Thorne's patients from the last few months? I can cross-reference it and verify Mr. Finch is on it. It would be a lifesaver. My manager is going to kill me. I'd picked the name Alistair Finch from one of the glowing testimonials on Thorne's website. It added a layer of authenticity. There was a pause. I could hear her chewing her lip. I'm not really supposed to do that. HIPAA regulations. I know, I pleaded. But this is an emergency protocol situation. Patient care comes first, right? I can give you my pharmacy license number. We're just trying to avoid a medical incident here. Mr. Finch seems very agitated. Another pause. Longer this time. I held my breath. Okay, she finally sighed, the sound of a woman who just wanted to go home. Okay, just this once. What's your email? I gave her a disposable email address I'd created for the occasion. pharmacy.citywell.help@protonmail.com. It sounded official enough. I'll send it over now, she said. Good luck. Sandra, you're a lifesaver, I breathed, and hung up. My heart was pounding. It was a wild long shot, a gamble on someone else's end-of-week exhaustion. But 5 minutes later, a notification popped up on the burner phone. An email with a PDF attachment. Subject: Active Patient Roster. I opened it, and there it was. A list of over 200 names. It was the key. For the next week, my life fell into a grim rhythm. By day, I was the declining matriarch, misplacing my reading glasses, asking David the same question 3 times in an hour, allowing Chloe to guide me by the elbow as if I were made of glass. But by night, I was a detective again, hunched over my secret phone, the names on Thorne's list glowing in the dark. I began the laborious process of cross-referencing each name with public records. I searched online obituaries, newspaper archives, and memorial websites in the wealthy suburbs of New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York. At first, there was nothing, just a sad, predictable list of the elderly passing away from the usual ailments of old age. I started to fear I was wrong, that I was chasing a phantom born of my own paranoia. But then I found the first one. Joseph Pirelli, 82, a retired construction magnate from Greenwich, Connecticut. Died 3 months ago. Cause of death listed in the obituary, a sudden cardiac event. His name was on Thorne's list. It was a coincidence. People of that age have heart attacks. I kept digging. 2 days later, I found another. Eleanor Vance, 79, of Scarsdale, New York. The widow of a hedge fund founder, died 5 months ago. Her obituary was more evasive, stating she had passed away peacefully in her sleep. But a search of local news archives revealed the police had initially been called to the scene. The official report, which I found on the county clerk's website, ruled it a suicide, an overdose of prescription medication. Her name was also on Thorne's list. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. This was no longer a coincidence. It was a whisper of a pattern. I worked with a feverish intensity, my fingers flying across the tiny screen. I found a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, all in the last 3 years, all wealthy, all patients of Dr. Marcus Thorne, all dead from either sudden cardiac events or suicide. It was a trail of bodies hidden in plain sight, their deaths dismissed as the sad, unremarkable end of a long life. The final piece of the puzzle required me to delve into the world of corporate finance, a world as murky as any crime scene. The obituaries for 2 of the victims mentioned that in lieu of flowers, donations could be made to something called the Silver Light Foundation. Another mentioned the Evergreen Trust. They sounded benevolent, compassionate, but they were a smokescreen. Using public business registration databases, I searched for these foundations. They were real, but they were little more than mailing addresses, shells with no public presence. The real discovery came when I looked at their corporate filings. The Silver Light Foundation, the Evergreen Trust, and 3 other obscure foundations linked to the other victims were all listed as subsidiaries. All were owned and controlled by a single holding company, a company I had never heard of, CD, Financial Ventures, LLC. My breath caught in my throat. CD, Chloe, David, no, it couldn't be. I frantically searched the state's corporate registry for CD, Financial Ventures. The filing documents were public. I clicked the link and the page loaded. Registered agent and sole proprietor, Chloe Saunders. My son's wife, my daughter-in-law. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I stared at her name on the screen, the neat digital letters forming a testament to an evil so profound it was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't just about my house. It wasn't about a greedy daughter-in-law trying to cash in on her inheritance early. This was a franchise, a murder-for-profit scheme, elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its execution. Thorne was the talent scout, identifying wealthy, isolated seniors. He would diagnose them, medicate them, gain their trust. Then, he would guide them toward updating their wills, directing their fortunes into Chloe's shell foundations. And then, when the money was secure, he would facilitate their deaths, cloaking the murders as suicides or natural causes. Frank hadn't been the first. He was just the latest transaction. The room felt cold, the air thin. I was living in a house bought with blood money, being cared for by a serial killer. The knowledge was a physical weight, pressing down on me. It made every interaction with Chloe a new kind of torture. Her smile was the grin of a skull. Her touch was the touch of a spider. The cruelest part, the most exquisitely painful twist of her knife, was Mia. My granddaughter. My sweet, brilliant Mia. She was 10, with Frank's curious eyes and a mind that moved like lightning. Chloe began to use her as a weapon, sharpening her innocence into a tool of surveillance. "Grammy is sick, sweetie," I overheard Chloe telling her one afternoon in the hallway, her voice a syrupy poison. "Her mind is getting fuzzy, like a television that's not quite on the right channel. So if she says strange things or seems sad or angry for no reason, you need to be a good girl and tell Mommy right away. We have to keep her safe." After that, Mia's gaze changed. When she looked at me, the unconditional love was still there, but it was now clouded with fear and a terrible, misplaced sense of responsibility. She would watch me when I read the paper, her brow furrowed, as if trying to detect a glitch in my programming. If I sighed, she would ask, "Are you okay, Grammy? Are you sad?" Every question was a small stab wound, a reminder of the wedge Chloe was systematically driving between us. I had to play my part. For my own survival, and now, for Mia's, I had to become the woman Chloe wanted everyone to see. I would forget where I put the remote control. I'd stand in the middle of the living room, a look of vacant confusion on my face, until Chloe or David would gently guide me back to my chair. It was a constant, gnawing performance. The effort it took to feign weakness when my mind was screaming with the truth was exhausting. I was an actor in the worst play imaginable, and the ticket price was my relationship with the only person in this family I still truly loved. One rainy Tuesday evening, Mia and I were playing chess. It was our ritual, something we'd done since she was old enough to understand how the pieces moved. The house was quiet. David was working late. Chloe was on a long video call in her home office, her laughter echoing faintly down the hall. For a brief moment, we were alone, cocooned in the warm light of the living room lamp. She was a gifted player. She saw the board not as a collection of individual pieces, but as a web of possibilities. She'd already taken my rook and a knight. I could see her setting up a fork, targeting my king and queen. She was focused, her little chin resting on her hand, her eyes darting across the squares. I looked at her, and a desperate, reckless idea took hold. It was a risk, a huge one, but seeing her there, so earnest and so unknowingly complicit, I couldn't bear it. I had to plant a seed, a tiny splinter of doubt in the narrative Chloe was building. I moved my queen, placing it in an apparently vulnerable position. A sacrifice. "That's a bad move, Grammy," Mia said softly, her eyes not leaving the board. "I can take your queen now." I leaned forward, my voice barely a whisper, a conspiratorial breath of air just for her. "Sometimes, my love," I said, my eyes locking with hers. "Sometimes the queen has to pretend to be a pawn." I held her gaze. "She makes everyone think she's weak, that she's an easy target. But it's all part of a plan, to trap the king." She looked up from the board. Her mouth was slightly open. The gears were turning in that brilliant mind of hers. She wasn't just hearing the words in the context of the game. I saw it. A flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible widening of her eyes. It was a flash of dawning comprehension, a spark of understanding that went far beyond the 64 squares in front of us. She didn't say anything. She simply looked back down at the board, at my exposed queen, and then at her own king. She didn't take the bait. Instead, she moved her bishop to a defensive position. The moment passed, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that the seed was planted. I could only pray that it would find fertile ground. My digital life as Brenda from Ohio became my sanctuary. In the online grief groups, I was a master of camouflage. I posted pictures of sunsets with captions like, "Stan would have loved this one, #miss you." I commented on other widows' posts with supportive, if generic, messages, sending hugs and prayers. One day at a time, I became a trusted, if unremarkable, member of the community, a ghost in the machine. And it was this persona that finally brought me the breakthrough I needed. It came as a private message on Facebook. The profile picture was of a smiling, middle-aged woman with her arm around an older man. The name was Sarah Carlisle. "Brenda," the message began, "I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I've been reading your post for a few weeks now. You sound like a very kind person. I'm going through something similar. I lost my father 6 months ago." I typed back carefully. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Sarah. It's a pain that never truly goes away, does it?" Her reply was almost instant. "No, it doesn't. But for me, it's more than just pain. It's doubt. Everyone tells me I should be grateful he's no longer suffering, but I don't believe he was." My fingers froze over the keyboard. "What do you mean?" "My father was Robert Carlyle," she wrote. "Carlyle Industrials. He was a force of nature, 80 years old, and still went into the office 3 days a week. He loved life. He loved his work. He was negotiating a deal in Japan the month before he died." I felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline. I remembered the name from my research. Robert Carlyle, one of Thorne's patients. Official cause of death, assisted suicide. And then, her message continued, a new paragraph appearing on my screen. "This woman came into my brother's life, a financial planner. Young, beautiful, very smart. She got so close to the family so fast. She started talking to my dad about estate planning and end-of-life dignity. She introduced him to her own psychiatrist, a Dr. Thorne. She said Dad seemed depressed." The screen blurred. I had to read the words twice. A daughter-in-law. It was the same pattern. The exact same blueprint. 6 weeks after meeting Dr. Thorne, Sarah wrote, her words a digital torrent of anguish. "My father, the man who survived the Korean War and 3 corporate takeover attempts, suddenly wanted to die. He signed documents. He took a cocktail of pills Dr. Thorne prescribed. My brother and his wife were right there, holding his hand, telling him how brave he was. They sold it to the whole family as an act of courage. But it felt wrong. It still feels wrong. He wasn't depressed. He was murdered." I finally typed my reply. "Did you go to the police?" "And say what?" she responded. "That my father took his own life and I have a bad feeling about it. They'd think I was a bitter daughter upset about the will, which, by the way, he changed a week before he died. He left a fortune to some charity she recommended. My brother got the rest. I was cut out completely. They'd say I was just after the money. This woman, his wife, she's got everyone convinced she's a saint." There it was. My first corroborating witness, a mirror image of my own nightmare. But she was terrified. Her testimony was a whisper in a private message, not a statement that could ever stand up in court. "I'm so scared," she wrote. "I don't know what to do." I looked at her words, and I saw my own reflection. I saw the fear, the helplessness, the way they had isolated her and discredited her before she could even speak. And in that moment, the final, terrifying obstacle became crystal clear. The police wouldn't believe her. They wouldn't believe me either. Not with Chloe and David painting me as a senile old woman. Not with Dr. Thorne's pristine reputation as a shield. There would be no cavalry, no rescue from Rick and my old friends at the NYPD. A formal investigation would get bogged down in legal challenges and psychiatric evaluations that I would surely lose. No, I couldn't rely on the system I had once served. The system was now their weapon. If I wanted justice, I had to get it myself. The obstacle wasn't just finding the truth. I had the truth. The obstacle was making the truth heard. And there was only one way to do that. I had to make the predators confess. I had to build a trap, bait it with my own life, and get Chloe and Thorne to walk right into it with the whole world watching. The investigation was over. The hunt was about to begin. The air in the living room was thick with a cloying mix of David's relief and Chloe's predatory patience. It felt like the final scene of a play I hadn't written. Chloe placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. The paper was crisp, expensive. It smelled like the end of my life. "Mom, this is for the best," David said, his voice wet with unshed tears. He wouldn't look at me. He looked at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder, as if my face was too much to bear. The wellness villa. It's beautiful. They have gardens. And staff who can help. Help me die, he meant. Help me disappear so his life could be simpler. I kept my face a carefully constructed mask of weary confusion. I let my eyes drift, unfocused. I picked at a loose thread on the arm of my chair. "A villa," I murmured, my voice a dry whisper. "That sounds nice?" Chloe smiled. It was a thin, sharp thing, a blade disguised as an expression of care. "It is, Elizabeth. Top of the line. And these papers," she tapped the stack, a perfectly manicured nail making a sharp little sound, "are just a formality. The power of attorney. It just makes it easier for me to manage your affairs. Pay the bills for the villa, handle the sale of the house. You won't have to worry about a thing." Oh, I knew that. I knew she would handle everything, liquidate it all, my home, my history, me. David finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke a piece of me that had somehow survived everything else. It was pity. Pure, undiluted pity for the confused old woman he thought he saw. Not a glimmer of the detective, the mother, the woman who had bandaged his knees and taught him how to read a map. He was looking at a ghost. "It's the right thing, Mom," he said, his voice pleading. "Please. For us. For you." I let a single tear trace a path down my cheek. A work of art, that tear. It cost me everything to produce it. I looked at the papers, then at Chloe, my gaze deliberately hazy. "All of it?" "Just a signature," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. She uncapped a heavy, expensive-looking pen and placed it in my hand. It felt cold, heavy, like a weapon being turned against me. "Right here, Elizabeth." My hand trembled. This, at least, was not an act. It was the tremor of a sniper settling into position, the final, steadying breath before the shot. I looked at the line. Elizabeth M. Croft. My name. The name I had before Frank. The name I had when I was a rookie, walking a beat in the Bronx, full of a fire they had spent a lifetime trying to extinguish. They thought this was my surrender. My signature on this page was my white flag. I let out a shuddering breath. I leaned forward. The pen scratched against the paper, the sound echoing in the silent room. I signed my name. I signed away my house, my accounts, my autonomy. I signed my life away. David broke then. He let out a choked sob of pure, unadulterated relief. He rushed to Chloe, wrapping his arms around her. "Thank you." He wept into her shoulder. "Thank you for being so strong. I couldn't do it." "Shh, baby," Chloe cooed, stroking his hair. Over his shoulder, her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw it, the flash of triumph, the cold, reptilian satisfaction of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. It was the same look she'd had at Frank's funeral, the look that started it all. She thought she had won. She thought the game was over. I let my head fall back against the chair, my eyes closing as if in exhaustion. But behind my eyelids, I was seeing a chessboard. I was seeing my queen, disguised as a pawn, moving into its final, fatal position. Later that night, the house was silent. A tomb. They thought I was asleep, probably dreaming of watercolor classes and therapy dogs at the wellness villa. But I was wide awake. The old instincts, the ones I had buried for decades, were firing on all cylinders. I slipped out of bed, my movements practiced and silent. I didn't turn on a light. I knew the layout of this house like the back of my hand. In the study, I retrieved the burner phone from its hiding place inside a hollowed-out copy of The Big Sleep. I powered it on, the small screen casting a pale, ghostly light on my face. I connected to a neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi. Old Mr. Henderson never did figure out how to set a password. From there, I routed my connection through 3 separate VPN servers, one in Sweden, one in Panama, one in Romania. Overkill, maybe, but I had learned a long time ago that there is no such thing as too careful. I opened a new encrypted email account. The username was random, a string of numbers and letters. The recipient was a name I hadn't typed in over a decade. Rick Dorsey, my old partner, my friend, the one man I knew I could still trust. My fingers flew across the tiny keyboard. I attached the files one by one. The financial records I had painstakingly pulled, showing the network of shell corporations, all leading back to Chloe. The list of Dr. Thorne's deceased patients, cross-referenced with obituaries and their suspiciously altered wills. The audio files from the hidden microphone in the den, capturing snippets of hushed phone calls. My full theory laid out in cold, hard, logical prose, the gaslighting, the manipulation of Frank. The systematic targeting of wealthy, vulnerable seniors. It was all there. My entire, silent investigation. My life's work, condensed into a single digital package. When it was all attached, I typed a subject line. One word. Contingency. I paused, my thumb hovering over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. If my plan failed, if Chloe outmaneuvered me, this email was my last will and testament. It was my voice from the grave. It was a message to Rick. I didn't just fade away. I was pushed. I pressed send. The small screen showed a progress bar, then the words, message sent. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The trap was set. The contingency was in place. Now, all I had to do was wait for the viper to strike. I wiped the phone, powered it down, and returned it to its literary tomb. I crept back to bed, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. 3 days later, Chloe came into my room. She was humming. It was one of those annoying, upbeat pop songs that go viral on TikTok for a week and then vanish. The sound was horribly out of place in the quiet, heavy atmosphere of the house. She was holding a small white paper bag from the pharmacy. "Good news, Elizabeth," she said, her smile brighter and more terrifying than ever. "Dr. Thorne has updated your prescription, something to help with the anxiety. About the move." She placed a bottle of pills on my bedside table. The label was stark and clinical. A cocktail of barbiturates and opioids. A death sentence in a child-proof bottle. "He said it will help you rest peacefully," she continued, her eyes glinting. "End-of-life anxiety can be so distressing." The clinical, detached language, straight from Thorne's playbook. I had heard it on the recordings, the same sterile phrasing used to discuss his other successes. I looked at the bottle, then at her. I allowed my eyes to fill with fear. I don't know. It's for the best," she said, her voice firm. "An order, not a suggestion. David and I have been talking. We think Friday night would be a good time to start the new medication. A quiet evening, so you can have a deep, peaceful sleep before we pack your things on Saturday. A final, permanent sleep." She was so sure of herself, so confident in my defeat. She even had the audacity to set up an alibi, cloaked in the grotesque language of online wellness influencers. Later that afternoon, she brought a tablet into my room and set it up on my dresser. "What's this for?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Oh, it's just something for my followers," she said, waving a dismissive hand. She was setting up a Twitch stream. My room was the backdrop. "I'm just going to have it pointed at this." She tapped a digital photo frame on my mantelpiece, which she had programmed to cycle through a slideshow of serene landscapes. A babbling brook. A sun-drenched forest. A misty mountain peak. "Why?" I whispered. She adjusted the angle of the tablet's camera. "So they can see how peacefully you're resting," she said, turning to me with that sickeningly compassionate smile. "I've told them all about your struggles, how hard this transition is. They're so supportive. It will be a comfort to them, and to David, to see that you've finally found some peace." An alibi broadcast to 300,000 people. Proof that she was a loving daughter-in-law, caring for her ailing mother-in-law in her final, quiet moments. It was brilliant. It was monstrous. I watched her work, my heart a cold, steady drum against my ribs. They thought the smart home was their weapon, the cameras, the sensors, the network that watched my every move. They thought it was their surveillance grid. They were wrong. It was mine. Their biggest mistake was underestimating me. Not just the detective, but the woman who had spent 45 years living with a man obsessed with the latest technology. Frank had loved his gadgets. He'd insisted on wiring this entire house himself. He'd taught me everything, how the network operated, where the back doors were, how to become the ghost in his machine. For the past month, while Chloe was busy monitoring camera feeds of me misplacing my keys, I had been waging a silent digital war. It started small, gaining access to the router's administrative settings. Frank's password was, predictably, the name of his favorite sailboat. From there, it was easy. I locked Chloe out of the highest level controls, creating a new administrator profile for myself, hidden behind layers of code. I became the gatekeeper. I owned the network. Every device was a listening post. The smart speaker in the kitchen, the thermostat in the hall, the television in the living room. They all had microphones. And they were all feeding directly to a secure cloud storage account I controlled. I had hours of it. Every hushed, vicious conversation. I had Thorne, his voice calm and professional, advising Chloe on the precise dosage needed to simulate a heart attack. The combination of secobarbital and oxycodone will be undetectable, Chloe. It will simply appear as cardiac arrest in a woman of her age and reported mental state. Just be sure to administer it after she's taken the sedative I prescribed. We don't want any resistance. I had Chloe, laughing. Resistance? Elizabeth? She can barely remember her own name. Don't worry, Marcus. This will be even easier than Frank. He was so sentimental at the end. It was pathetic. I had them discussing the financial transfers, the liquidation of my assets, the shell corporations, the offshore accounts. They laid out their entire criminal enterprise, believing they were speaking in the secure privacy of my own home. My home. But the Twitch stream, that was the masterstroke, and it wasn't mine alone. The message I'd given Mia during our last game of chess had landed. Sometimes the queen has to pretend she's a pawn to trap the king. I had seen the flicker of understanding in her eyes. She was a quiet girl, my granddaughter, always lost in her own world of code and logic. She saw the patterns everyone else missed. She saw the game Chloe was playing. A few days after that, a package had arrived for her, a gift from Grandma. A new, high-end programming laptop. Tucked inside the user manual was a slip of paper with a string of characters. An anonymous, encrypted chat link. She didn't just understand my message, she became my most vital operative. Mia was a prodigy, a true coding genius. While her parents saw a withdrawn teenager, I saw a mind capable of dismantling digital fortresses. I gave her the network architecture, the device IDs, everything she needed. And she built me a weapon. She called it the Switch, a piece of elegant, brutal code embedded deep within the streaming software on the tablet. On the surface, it was a simple live stream, broadcasting a video file of serene landscapes. But the Switch created a secondary, hidden feed. This feed was linked to a different camera, a tiny nanny cam, no bigger than a coin, that I had installed weeks ago. It was tucked away on the bookshelf, nestled between a first edition of Chandler and a worn copy of Poe. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of my bed. With a single, pre-programmed command from my burner phone, a simple text message containing a specific 10-digit number, the Switch would activate. It wouldn't stop the stream. It wouldn't create an error. It would simply, and instantaneously, swap the video sources. The 300,000 followers, David, the entire world watching the peaceful forest scene, would suddenly be watching a live broadcast from the nanny cam. They would see whatever was happening in my room, in real time. They thought they had built me a prison. I had turned it into a stage, and tonight was opening night. The house grew quiet as the evening wore on. The sedative Chloe had given me with dinner was real, a mild benzodiazepine designed to make me drowsy and compliant. I played my part, my movements slow, my speech slurred. I let David help me into bed, his touch gentle, his face a mask of guilt and sorrow. "Get some rest, Mom," he whispered, pulling the covers up to my chin. "I'll try, sweetie," I mumbled, letting my eyes flutter closed. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I lay in the dark, my senses screaming. I was not drowsy. My heart was pounding a steady, furious rhythm. I was more awake than I had been in years. I could hear the hum of the tablet. I could see its small blue power light reflected in the mirror across the room. The show was about to begin. I waited. 1 hour. 2. I regulated my breathing, keeping it slow and shallow, the way a person in a deep, drugged sleep would breathe. Then I heard it. The soft click of my bedroom door opening. Chloe slipped inside. She moved with a silent, predatory grace. In her hand, she held a syringe, a small, clear tube filled with my death. The needle caught the faint moonlight from the window, glinting for a second. She moved to my bedside, her shadow falling over me. I could smell her perfume, an expensive floral scent that suddenly seemed nauseatingly sweet. She stood there for a long moment, just watching me, ensuring I was truly under. I didn't flinch. I didn't move a muscle. I was stone. I was ice. She leaned in close, her face just inches from mine. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper, filled with a chilling intimacy. "It's a shame, Elizabeth." My eyes remained closed. My breathing remained shallow. "Frank was so much easier," she murmured, her breath warm against my cheek. The sound of her voice, so close, so venomous, was like acid. He actually believed I loved him. Can you imagine? After all those years with you, he was so desperate for a kind word that he just gave up. He didn't fight at all. He just let go. She laughed. It was a soft, private sound, a sound of pure, unadulterated evil. "You fought. I'll give you that. The little glint in your eye, the questions. You're a stubborn old bitch." She paused, and I could feel her looking at the tablet on the dresser. "But in the end, you're all the same. Just assets. Assets waiting to be liquidated." She lifted the syringe. I could hear the faint whisper of the plunger as she tapped it, expelling a tiny bead of liquid. This was the moment. The precipice. My hand, hidden beneath the thick duvet, was wrapped around the burner phone. My thumb was already on the send button. As she lowered the needle toward my arm, I sent the command. Across town, in the sterile quiet of his minimalist apartment, David was watching his phone. He had the Twitch stream open, a small act of penance. He wanted to see the proof that his mother was, as Chloe had promised, finally at peace. The screen showed a tranquil forest, sunlight filtering through the leaves. He took a sip of whiskey, the glass shaking slightly in his hand. Then, the image flickered. Just for a microsecond. A digital stutter. The forest vanished. It was replaced by a new image. Grainy, shot from a strange angle. It took him a second to recognize the room. The bookshelf. The headboard of the bed. It was his mother's room. And then he saw them. His mother, lying still and pale in the bed. And his wife, Chloe, standing over her, holding a syringe. Her voice, tinny and distorted through the phone's speaker, filled the silence of his apartment. "In the end, you're all the same, just assets." Assets waiting to be liquidated. David's phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. But the broadcast continued, echoing in the room. And it wasn't just David, it was Chloe's 300,000 followers, the ones who had been posting heart emojis and messages of support. The chat log, which had been a slow crawl of praying for her, and "You're such a good daughter," exploded. "WTF is this? Is that a needle? OMG, call the police. She just confessed to murder. What did she say about Frank? This is sick." The serene stream had become the most public murder confession in history. In the room, Chloe knew nothing. She was lost in her moment of triumph, her face illuminated by the pale light of the tablet still dutifully broadcasting its serene forest scene to an audience that was no longer there. She pressed the tip of the needle against the thin skin of my arm, It was cold. And then, I opened my eyes. The sound wasn't a knock. It was a splintering crack, the noise of a world breaking. The bedroom door didn't open. It exploded inwards, crashing against the wall. And there he stood. My son, David. His face wasn't just pale. It was the color of ash, a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. In his hand, his phone was still live, and from its tiny speaker, I could hear the faint, tinny echo of Chloe's voice. Her sweet, venomous whisper, confessing everything. My own voice, pretending to be sedated, was a ghostly counterpoint. Chloe froze. A perfect, crystalline moment of stillness. The syringe, filled with its cocktail of death, was held halfway between the vial and my arm. Her head snapped toward David, her mouth opening, but no sound came out. The mask of the caring, concerned daughter-in-law didn't just slip. It shattered into a million pieces, revealing the frantic, cornered animal beneath. Her eyes, which had held such cold, calculating certainty only a second before, were now wide with raw panic. David, she finally managed, her voice a strangled squeak. David, it's not what you think. She's delirious. She's been saying crazy things all day. But the lie died on her lips. It was too late. The evidence was right there, playing on a loop in his hand, a digital ghost singing a song of murder. David just stared, his eyes flicking from the phone to the syringe, from the syringe to me, from me to the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted over his own mother. He took a staggering step back, a low, guttural sound escaping his throat, the sound of a man's soul tearing in two. And then another sound joined the terrible tableau. Faint at first. A distant whine, like a mosquito in the summer night. It grew steadily, a rising electronic keen that cut through the silence in the room. Closer, louder, a harmony of impending justice. Sirens, not just one, a chorus of them, screaming through the manicured, quiet streets of Willow Creek. Chloe heard it too, her head whipped towards the window, her whole body trembling. The panic in her eyes curdled into pure, unadulterated terror. She dropped the syringe. It clattered on the hardwood floor, rolling under the bed, a final discarded piece of her failed plan. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, no, no. She looked at me then, her face contorting with a sudden, venomous hatred. You did this. The sirens were deafening now, culminating in a screech of tires on the driveway. Red and blue lights began to strobe against the bedroom walls, painting the scene in frantic, flashing colors of emergency. The peaceful, curated world of Chloe's Instagram feed had been invaded by the brutal, chaotic reality she had created. Heavy footsteps pounded on the porch, followed by a deafening bang on the front door. Police, open up! David still hadn't moved, a statue of grief and shock. Chloe, however, was galvanized into action. She made a dash for the bedroom door, trying to push past him. David, we have to go. We can explain. Help me. But he didn't move. He was a wall of broken trust. She scrambled past him just as the front door downstairs gave way with a crash. We heard shouts. Police, show me your hands. I did something I hadn't done in what felt like an eternity. I sat up. Slowly, deliberately. The movement was fluid, not the creaking, pained motion of a frail old woman, but the controlled, measured action of a body that still remembered strength. The fog of pretended dementia lifted from my features. My mind was a steel trap, and the door had just snapped shut. Chloe was being dragged back into the hallway by two uniformed officers. She was screaming now, a wild, incoherent litany of denials and accusations. She's crazy! She's trying to frame me! David, tell them! Tell them she's senile! A familiar figure appeared in the doorway behind them. Older, grayer, but with the same steady eyes I'd trusted for 30 years. Rick, my old partner from the NYPD. He took in the scene, me sitting on the bed, David catatonic against the wall, the officers struggling with a shrieking Chloe. He gave me a single grim nod, a nod that said, "We got it, Elizabeth. It's over." They cuffed her. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a lock turning, of a cage being secured. It was the sound of the end. Chloe's incredulous screaming turned to sobs of rage and defeat as they read her rights. As they led her past the bedroom door, she twisted her head, her eyes locking with mine one last time. They were stripped bare of all their power, all their manipulative charm. All that was left was a raw, burning hatred. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat. I wanted her to see me. Not the confused old woman she tried to create, not the victim she was about to make, but the person I had always been, buried under years of grief and gaslighting. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not loud. It was clear, cold, and carried the weight of absolute finality. "You thought I was a nosy old woman," I said, each word a perfectly placed stone on the grave of her ambition. "You thought I was a fading memory, a loose end to be tied up. You were wrong." I held her gaze, a detective looking at a perpetrator. Case closed. They pulled her away. Her final, choked sob echoed down the hall, and then there was only the sound of my son, finally collapsing against the wall, his own sobs ragged and raw. The victory was mine, but the cost was already becoming terrifyingly clear. The aftermath was a blur of calculated procedure and raw emotion. Paramedics came in, their faces a mixture of professional calm and morbid curiosity. They asked me questions, standard procedure, but their eyes kept darting around the room, trying to piece together the story that would soon be on every news channel. I answered them calmly, refused any medical treatment. The only sickness in this house was being hauled away in the back of a police car. Rick came in after they left. He closed the door gently, shutting out the chaos of the forensic teams now sweeping through the house. He looked at me, a long, searching look. "You okay, Elizabeth?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine, Rick," I said. "Thank you." The 911 switchboards lit up like a Christmas tree. People from as far away as London were calling in. Your live stream had over 300,000 viewers by the end. He shook his head in disbelief. An influencer, live streaming her own murder confession. You can't make this stuff up. She was arrogant, I said. It's always the arrogance that gets them. He nodded, his gaze falling on David, who was now sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. What about him? I looked at my son, and for the first time, I felt a crack in my own composure. He's the other victim in this, Rick. He just doesn't know it yet. The days that followed were a media hurricane. My quiet, tree-lined street in Willow Creek became a satellite camp for news vans. Reporters shouted questions at me every time I dared to open my front door. They called me the Grandma Detective, the Silent Avenger. My face was plastered everywhere, a split screen with Chloe's glamorous, smiling influencer photos. The hashtags were sickeningly catchy. #DeathPositiveKiller, #CaseClosed. Chloe, #Grandma's Revenge. I had become a viral sensation, a meme, a cautionary tale for the digital age. The entire world knew my name, but none of them knew the hollow ache in my chest. The news of Dr. Marcus Thorne's arrest was a brief, satisfying footnote. He was apprehended at JFK, trying to board a flight to a small Caribbean nation with no extradition treaty. The news report showed him in his tailored suit, his face a mask of indignation as federal agents slammed him against a wall. They found a briefcase full of cash and bearer bonds. His network of greed and death, so carefully constructed over years, had been dismantled by a woman he'd dismissed as a neurotic senior. It was a neat, tidy end to his story. My own story was messier. Victory had a steep price. I had my house, I had my freedom, I had my name back, but I had lost my son. David came to the house a week later. The news vans had finally moved on to the next spectacle. He stood in the living room, the same living room where he had once pleaded with me to trust his wife, to accept her help. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the empty space where a family portrait used to hang. They're calling her the Willow Creek Witch online, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I'm sorry you have to see that, David. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were haunted. They were the eyes of a man who had stared into the abyss and seen his own reflection. You knew, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, filled with a terrible, self-lacerating shame. All that time, you knew what she was. And I called you paranoid. I told you that you were losing your mind. You saw what she wanted you to see, I said gently. She was a professional, David. She fooled a lot of people. But I'm your son, he whispered, and his voice broke. I should have protected you. Instead, I helped her. I helped her build your prison. Every camera, every sensor. I helped her do it. I stood by and watched her try to destroy you, and I did nothing. There was nothing I could say to that, because it was true. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that we could fix this, that we could rebuild, but I knew it was a lie. He couldn't look at me without seeing his own failure, without seeing the monster he had brought into our lives, into our family. He was a broken man, and I was the constant living reminder of how he had been broken. I can't stay here, he said, finally looking away. I can't be in this house. Where will you go? I don't know, he said, turning and walking toward the door, but I can't be here. He left without saying goodbye. I watched him go, my son, a ghost walking away from the wreckage of his life. I had won the war, but the collateral damage was my own heart. A few days later, another car pulled into the driveway. This time, it was Mia. She got out, carrying a single suitcase. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. She walked into the house, my brilliant, quiet granddaughter, and looked at me with an understanding far beyond her years. She was the one who had understood my cryptic message in the chess game. She was the one who had helped me build the digital deadfall switch for the live stream. We were two survivors, bound together by the shrapnel of Chloe's destruction. I told Dad I was staying with you for a while, she said simply. He didn't argue. We fell into a quiet routine, two women rebuilding from the wreckage. We packed up Chloe's things in silence, boxing up the designer clothes and expensive gadgets like artifacts from a toxic civilization. We dismantled the smart home system, pulling cameras off walls and sensors out of doorways, reclaiming the house inch by inch. One morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through emails on a new laptop, when I saw one with a subject line that made me pause. It just said, "Thank you." It was from Sarah, the woman from the online support group, the one whose father had been a patient of Dr. Thorne, whose life had been ruined by her own sister-in-law, another of Thorne's disciples. I opened it. The message was short. Elizabeth, I saw the news. They arrested my brother's wife this morning. She confessed to everything. She said she was part of a group. They connected her to Thorne. It's all coming out. For years I thought I was going crazy. Nobody believed me. Thank you. You gave me my life back. I closed the laptop, a single, hot tear tracing a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, or even of joy. It was a tear of profound, weary validation. My fight hadn't just been for me. It had been for Frank, for Sarah's father, for the 6 other names on my list, for all the victims silenced by greed and gaslighting. That email was the final piece. It was the permission I needed to let go. I sold the house in Willow Creek, the house Frank and I had built, the house where I'd raised my son, the house that had become my prison. The real estate agent said it sold in a day, for well over asking. Apparently, murder houses have a certain dark cachet in the market. I didn't care. I just wanted it gone. I signed the papers and never looked back. Now, I'm standing on a balcony, 100 miles away from Willow Creek. The air here tastes of salt, not secrets. The only sound is the rhythmic crash of waves on the shore and the cry of gulls overhead. Mia is inside, her coding textbook spread across the table, the quiet tap of her keyboard a comforting, constant presence. My new apartment is small, bright, and filled with light. There are no cameras in the corners. There are no sensors on the doors. It's just a home. I look out at the endless expanse of the ocean, the horizon, a clean, sharp line between the water and the sky. I don't feel triumph. Triumph is a loud, celebratory thing, and there is nothing loud in my heart. There is no elation, no sense of gloating victory. The price was too high for that. What I feel is something quieter, deeper, and far more potent. It's the silent, steady hum of a battle won. It's the feeling of a heavy weight, one I didn't even realize I was carrying for years, finally being lifted from my shoulders. It is the quiet, the brutal, and the absolute relief of being free.